Okay, can you hear me now, Ammar?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. We're now recording, and
Awesome.
thank you for taking the time to talk to people at the University of Waterloo. I know this discussion is going to be valuable. There are a lot of changes happening in operations and supply chain management areas at the moment, and we're going to consider quite a few of those. Can I just ask, though, as an introduction for the people who'll be watching it,
Yeah.
for you to talk about your experience in supply chain management, what have you been doing?
Awesome. First off, thank you, Peter, for giving me the opportunity. Love speaking to the students and sharing my experience here. So I've been with supply chain from the beginning of my career, and I've evolved as I've moved through the different positions. So at a quick summary of my supply chain experience is I started off with the HPC back when, if to some of the students would remember, as Zellers was around. And Bay used to be much bigger, and I started doing just basic supply chain. We're moving inventory from one store to another and balancing inventory. So that was a short stint, and then after completing my industrial engineering, I started with Canadian Tire, and it's one of the lean supply chain machines out there. And I started off within supply chain in process improvement, actually. So, and as hopefully we'll get to chat about it, that's a core component in supply chain, always thinking about improving things. And from there, I moved to a team called sourcing optimization, again, in sync with the improvements. It's basically how do you optimize as loads are coming in from offshore, and hopefully we'll chat about that. And then I did an F&R role of forecasting and replenishment, where how do you manage both your forecast and your replenishment. So it's a balancing act, not having too much, too little. And from there, I got the opportunity to go on the other side of retail world. So with a supplier, some of you guys would know a company called Coleman. It's a camping company. So I was on the supplier side, and they're balancing inventory, demand planning. Hopefully we'll touch on that. And from there, I came back to the retail side within Lowe's, and this time it was end-to-end supply chain. So how do you get the product from sourcing all the way down to the stores, ensuring you support the promo, store opening, so on and so forth. And from there, I started off my education sector again with my MBA in actually technology and innovation. And there, while working for Lowe's, and I moved to Lindt, the chocolate company, for a short stint. And there, hopefully, I'll share some examples of how many different kinds of chocolates that are out there. One would venture to take a guess, and people generally say 100, 200, 500, but I only managed one section for about 1,800 different types of seasonal chocolate. So it was pretty amazing. And from there, I did a bit of a turn after completing the MBA, where I am with TELUS right now in their procurement division. So it's the starting point of when you define supply chain, as we would say, the sourcing aspect of it. So I'm working within procurement and doing their fiber optics procurement. Again, a lot of cost savings initiatives that I work on, and hopefully I'll get to touch on those. So in a summary, I guess that's where I'm at right now.
Wonderful. And I mean, great experience, a range of companies making products which are very attractive, I think, to many people. But at the same time, these are all companies that you've worked for that are leaders in supply chain. So, you know, your experience is wonderful, and I'm grateful to you for sharing it. We are gonna touch on a lot of the things that you mentioned. Hopefully, we'll get to all of them. We'll see. But I thought I would start just for people who are watching this, some of them don't really know that much about supply chain. So could you just give a description of what supply chain management is for their benefit?
Sure. And, you know, I'll actually touch on two definitions, as probably there are multiple out there. But for me, a practical definition that I keep in mind as I work through my day-to-day life is getting the right product, the right time, in the right quantity. So that's, be it a product or a service, it's getting that right quantity, time, and product to the people. So having that customer-centric view. But I guess the more definition, or a practical definition that I use as well, it's a design, operation, and improvement of the systems that create and deliver the firm's products or services. And, you know, I've worked on products and services for now, for example. So how do you get it out to the customer? So those are two definitions that I use in my mind as I work through my daily life.
Wonderful. And I'm interested in why it's so important today. It seems companies seem to be more focused on it now. It's an area where there's a lot of change. So why is it so important today?
And it's uber important. So let me put this thing in context. As you know, getting the right product was important from the beginning, right? Like having the quantity on the shelf was important, but it's actually super important right now because of the hyper competitive world we are living in. And we will touch on globalization as a result of that. Now you can buy something, from, let's say, Canadian Tire or a Walmart, but you can buy it on Amazon from directly from China as well. So what that means is you're competing not just locally, you're competing globally. And as a result of that, you need to have the optimal cost structure, or else you won't be able to complete. And that's why supply chain comes into play. That how do you ensure that you are paying the most optimal price for a product, because there's only a definite amount of demand. So you need to ensure that you can charge the optimal amount. So companies have limited resources. I'll give you an example, a more current example from TELUS to put things in context. 5G, I hope people have heard about it. It's coming. There has been an auction that spectrum has been given out, and companies need to build infrastructure for that now. So, in order for you to build that infrastructure, you need money. In order to get that money, you need to ensure that you're not spending that somewhere else. So, where is that somewhere else? Usually, they come knocking on the doors of supply chain and say, hey, we need this X dollars. How do we get it? So, you go to supply chain, and supply chain would look at it. Hey, can we reduce our inventory? Can we be more just in time? So it actually offers a solution to real life problems. And there, which is why it's more strategically important, and companies are realizing that and paying that much attention to supply chain now.
And as they are paying more attention to it, and as globalization and technology is changing, that seems to be causing challenges too for organizations. You've talked about those a little bit. Could you talk a little bit more about, what are the challenges they're facing in dealing with it?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I've hopefully touched on why it's important, right? Like, so we know that we need to use supply chain, but so let me break it down, I guess, in today's world. And the problem that I had across pretty much every company is it's a big data problem. We have too much data within supply chain now. So now it's being able to synthesize that data and come up with a solution. So the challenge becomes, one in supply chain is an outdated technology. The technology is moving at such a high speed. Supply chain needs to keep pace with that. So most companies, or some companies I would say, are still, for example, using spreadsheets to do forecasting, whereas with the amount of data that is available, you need more software that is real time in order to do that. We talked about globalization, so you're competing globally. There are suppliers in different parts of the world. We get, for example, products from Philippines, and there's some products that are coming from Asia, or China in particular. So I mean, you're dealing with different supplier groups from different parts of the world in there. So you need to be able to keep that communication link. And then hopefully we'll touch on this piece, which is a big issue in supply chain world right now, is digitization. That's happening, right? So we're talking about cloud-based computing now. Data used to be stored in servers. Now it's in a virtual world. Here, how do you deal with that and ensure that it's still real time and you have access to that? So these are some of the challenges that supply chain world is facing.
Thank you. And we are going to talk about the impact of technology, particularly digitization, you referred to. Before we get to that, I just want to touch on a couple of areas that I know you've spent some time working on. And I wanted you just to tell me about what that had involved, and how people might approach that. So first of all, managing inventory. You've done some of that, and what do you see as being the important aspects that you would share about that?
Thanks. So I think managing inventory, as you rightly pointed out, I've spent a considerable amount of time doing that, and in different types. So again, it's going a bit theoretical here, which students could appreciate, is I have worked for companies that have push and pull systems. So I'll start off, I started off my career, as I mentioned, at Canadian Tire, which is primarily a pull system where it's a dealer-based network. So you can't say how much inventory that you will send to them. They decide how much they want. And it's not necessarily always based on the demand. So it's not that if you have a product that's on sale and they have sold X number in the past, they will buy that. They buy it based on whatever quantity they think they need. They want to hoard perhaps some inventory. So it's a different way of forecasting for that. So that is something that one needs to keep in mind when you're managing inventory in a pull system. It's a dealer psyche almost. You have to keep that into mind, because it's not simply looking at the forecast of the weather and knowing that what impact it will have on your demand. And the other side was Lowe's, for example, which is a push inventory model. I was managing an entire team for supply chain where we can send amount of inventory. I decide how much, and for so I'm sending inventory that I feel the stores would need based on the sales I see. Slightly easier, but again, the complications come in where you're talking about domestic and international suppliers, different lead times, different forecasting strategies when it comes to each of these product lines. So you need to be very nimble when it comes to supply chain management of inventory, depending on your type of product. You can't just have one single strategy for managing your inventory. So I think the last piece I'll put on over here is the different forecasting strategies that I've talked about. The flow of product becomes very important in managing inventory. So in my life, I've spent, when I talk about in managing inventory, I spend most of the time in flowing of the product and thinking strategically. It's not simply about how much I need, it's about when I need. So usually, put things in context, something comes from offshore, you are planning for that inventory at least a year out. And 8 months out, you are actually putting purchase orders. So I would have my team cut purchase orders. And then you need to flow that in, because if you think about something as big as a patio set, it has a real constraint on space. It's not just a number on a spreadsheet. You need to think about its cube, how big it is, because it literally has jammed up a 150,000 square foot distribution center simply because somebody brought a little bit too much inventory. So you need to look at the flow, when it's going to come into the distribution center and when it will flow out in there. So those are some of the fun things when it comes to management of inventory within supply chain.
Yeah, and I think it is fun because you're dealing with physical products and you've got real challenges that you're able to see, and especially as things are moving much more quickly, it does make it quite exciting. You mentioned the differences between push and pull approaches, and that I think is very valuable, and also the challenges that there might be with forecasting now. What about demand management? You've done that too, and what did that involve?
So demand management is actually, it's a more comprehensive package to me, that the way I dealt with demand management, because that was my sole responsibility, for example, within Coleman, managing the entire demand for the Canadian division. So it's not just about forecasting, because forecasting is an aspect. You decide how much you're going to bring in, which products at what time in there. But demand management entailed just working with or cross collaborating with your supplier team, as in the people who are buying, because potentially you already have inventory of certain products. So you need to take into account how much inventory do you have. And even though you may be selling, let's say, a particular type of cooler more, and you know that you can sell more, but the simple fact that maybe, let's say, a Walmart didn't take their inventory the previous season and an older version of cooler is available, you would change your forecast to ensure that you put more in that older version, and so that you have more inventory because you have more inventory. So that's one aspect. But demand management also takes into account things like promotion. So how much are you putting out on flyers, for example? You will take into account seasonality, which is part of forecasting, but also it's a collaboration between sales. What are they pushing for? So it's not just a forecasting, but it's an end-to-end. You take into account all different pieces and you highlight risks, and there's portion of demand management, a big component for my job was supply and operations planning, and they're highlighting risks and opportunities in there. So not simply based on forecast, but where is there an opportunity where you can maximize sales, for example.
Okay, so with demand management, you're moving beyond simply forecasting and replenishing based on that forecast or ordering based on the
Yeah.
forecast. But with demand management, you're starting to get into influencing what the orders will be, and you're influencing the things that you were forecasting before. So it's giving you more control. That's basically what you're doing?
Exactly. Or as I would like to say, it adds more fun to your role, because you actually are within supply chain. People tend to think of it, you just helping, to get a product on. You are in demand management. You actually have a levers to say what you will be selling. So if I wanted to see a lot of these X coolers in the market, I would have a rationale behind it, but you are actually from the back end in supply chain controlling what products gets on the shelf, because that's more inventory. And actually, just as I think about it, you build more inventory with suppliers as well. So, for example, even though you may need this camping gear X, let's say, because that's what you intended to sell in there. But you go to your supplier in Bangladesh who's producing these tents for you, and they say, hey, we only have our supplying products that we have. The raw materials are actually for product B, this tent, which is of different quality, different material in there. Because they have inventory available of that, you need to now change your forecast to accommodate for that supplier and push for that. I mean, again, there will be interactions as to you'll have a different pricing strategy that will come with, and so on and so forth. But you are changing. It's not simply you forecasted and you try to get that inventory. It's working with every different components within that end-to-end supply chain, be it sales team or the supplier or the marketing team or the finance team, and you change your strategy based on that to get that product out to the customer.
Very interesting. And presumably part of the reason you do that now more would be that forecasting in a world that's changing much more quickly. Yeah, I'm not going to answer the question or put words in your mouth, but is it easier or harder today? What is the relationship between this management of demand, your own agility in responding to things that are happening in the market, and the work that you do today in forecasting? So I guess there are a few points there. Is it easier or harder, and the relationship between agility and forecasting?
Yeah, so let me touch on the first piece. I mean, to be honest, I'm going to say it's both. So I'll explain what I mean by that. So one would say it's easier, and the obvious reasons for that, I mean, we have evolved in technology. If you could imagine, like even when just before I started Canadian Tire, they were a few years back, they were doing paper POs. So I mean, now that the shared technology that we have, I mean, with the software that we have, for example, if people have heard of SAP, I'm sure, JDA, the kind of things you can do, kind of data points you can get from these softwares is pretty amazing. So it's made your job easier when it comes to that. You have access to more information. You have softwares. One click can actually get you, here's what you think. But at the same time, it's much harder now because it's not a linear relationship that you previously had to some degree, right? Like you only had set number of products. So I'm going to go back to Lindt for a moment. And as I mentioned, the sheer number of chocolates that you have. So Lindt, I managed only one part of the business, over 1,500 different types of chocolates. One can imagine, so the reason you had these many chocolates, I know I was gaining weight, and that's why I had to move on to a different role. Is for example, you have these Easter bunny chocolates that you come around Easter time. People have seen them in golden foils or silver foils. But the moment, for example, you change that ribbon color on from red to they think now this year it's going to be blue, and marketing has done some research. When it comes to forecasting, it's completely new product because it will have a new set of demand for it, and because they have forecasted now, so that adds a level of complexity because you're now changing products. That's the need of the hour. Like companies are coming up with products in order to keep up with the demand for and the changes in that are happening. So now you have to keep all those moving pieces in mind. So this, I think, links to the agility piece. So what this requires now for supply chain to do is need to be flexible. You need to be swift. You need to be alert. You need to be accessible, as in being able to access all those relevant data points that are available. Because again, using that example of from red to blue ribbon, you have the history for red, but maybe if you have sold a different kind of chocolate with blue, combining that in there. So change is the name of the game. The question is usually how often and what is the magnitude of change, because now it's nothing is going to be static. One thing that is for sure is nothing will be the same, and organizations as a result are now trying to be more nimble to adapt to the changing demands of the customers. So you do put in a plan, but knowing fully well that you would need to adapt. So as technology is moving at this really high speed, what's coming down at you is all these changes, and you have to now be responsive to all those changes and be able to change your plans and adapt to it.
Very exciting, at the same time probably very challenging and hard, but at the same time I think hugely exciting. Yeah. And so this brings us on to, you started, I think at the beginning, one of the things you mentioned that we could cover was digitization inside the supply chain and the impact of technology. So you started to talk about that with SAP, which I also have had some experience with, a very fascinating product. But can you talk about the impact that technology is having now then?
I think this technology, I think we have touched on it, but it has a massive impact. And let me, I guess, use an example to explain this from a real life perspective. So I've touched on 5G. I mean, I'll have to live this world on a daily basis, so that's on top of my mind. In there, so we have moving towards 5G. It's inevitable that something that's coming, or as a result, all our products are changing. Every cell phone that we are using, it will become obsolete pretty much when we have 5G, because if people have to stay up on this new network, there are new devices. In fact, they will be hitting as early as in few months' time that are coming, and within, let's say, a few years, pretty much all the devices. So what that means from a supply chain perspective is now your product line is changing. What that means is now that even the software that you're using to support those previous products need to change and need to impact with that, because it's usually connected. You have to understand that once 5G comes in, that means your servers and everything, your stations are now going to have a new set of hardware, and as a result, you need a new set of software. And as a result, the products or the software that were supporting those products, they need to be upgraded. So it's a cycle. They're all interconnected dots. And as a result of this one high level change, everything below changes, and technology as a result is adapting to that. So what that means, though, is one is you need to be able to at some point have a parallel plan, because you need to be in the old world and the new world before you transition onto the new world. So that's one complication when technology changes. And the second piece is around that when technology is changing is the financial impact, because when you are in two different worlds, you're paying for two different resources. So the pressure is back on you. At the end of the day, you need to ensure that your EBITDA numbers or the amount of profit the company generates pretty much still stays the same. So how do you do that? So what that entails is a downward impact. That means you need to be more optimized in your planning, in your operations planning, so you can ensure your bottom line stays the same. So the idea behind this is one needs to look at it at a very different levels. It's not simply the technology has changed and you adapt to a new technology. It has downward and upwards impact, and they're all connected. Hopefully that adds some context to it.
I think so. And I guess you're talking to some degree about both products and processes as far as technology goes. You were talking about SAP, which would influence processes. Yeah. And you're talking about the 5G, which influences the product, exactly. Which influences the processes that you're going to have to manage. So both of those things would be part of what we would call digital transformation today,
Yeah.
and its impact on the supply chain is something that, well, I'd be keen that you talk a little bit about what organizations might be doing there, and any advice that you might have for them on it.
Uh, I mean, I'll start with the advice piece because I feel like there's a lot of things that organizations can do, and the one I've touched on is being nimble and being be ready for change. And there, because I'll give you an example. For example, with digitization, I work within procurement. There's small things like at the end of a deal, you have to sign these contracts. And now with digitization, there is the digital signature capability that has come in. I mean, if you think about it, it's quite useful if you don't have to physically sign contracts, scan them, and mail them again, and then one party signs it, and then because there are multiple levels of signatures. But what this now entails is there are issues, one with the safety or the security aspect of it, so people are a bit apprehensive about it in there, so you need to ensure that you get them in confidence. Yes, it's a secure technology, and then you are able to integrate it with your existing, let's say, the storage systems that you have. And there, so companies need to be open to that. So there's a big change management component that goes with digitization, and that's critical. So again, supply chain, it doesn't work in their siloed. It's change management is core part of that in there. So that's the second aspect. And the last aspect is companies need to be proactive when it comes to digitization, because I know they're slowly getting onto it. Only I would say the tech sector is perhaps a little bit ahead when it comes to digitization. So they are embracing that change and proactively integrating it as part of their systems and processes. And there, whereas some of, for example, our healthcare, I have friends and I work with, TELUS has a healthcare division as well. And those guys are a bit on the, let's call them, on slightly on the backside of it, So the simple reason, if you think about our healthcare, right now, we don't have electronic medical records, for example, and there. So that digitization, it's slowly changing. It's so this would have an impact as we go along, and all the sectors would have to jump on this bandwagon.
Yeah, we seem to be at a point in many sectors at the moment where there's an understanding that digital transformation is going to come, and a sense in a lot of organizations that it needs to be part of their strategy, but some slowness to move beyond a full acceptance of that, if you like. There's some experimentation done so far and some implementations in some areas of organizations, but as part of the comprehensive approach, there's a hesitation to commit to that, maybe.
And yeah, there is, and there are multiple reasons. I mean, one is we talked about the change management, but sometimes there is a genuine disconnect. So for example, Canadian Tire is a big corporation, right? And for them to move to a certain technology, it's not just, as a company, they can say we are open to change, but there is a connected cycle to their suppliers. So for example, they're using a new digital technology when it comes to their purchase or ERP systems. And but they have to now deal with like literally 25,000 vendors, suppliers in there. So they need to be on that digital same mode of communication, same system, same digital world that they need to be in. And some of them are smaller players, and they don't want to invest in that. So as a result of that, they have to play in two different worlds. And sometimes they think, since we have to pay for the legacy system, the old system and the new one, they're hesitant to get on to the new one. So there's sometimes more to it. It's not just their apprehension for taking on the new technology. It's what's the downward impact. So that's a disconnect sometimes.
Yeah, very important. And so understanding the integrated or systemic impact of a technological change in one area, or a commitment to it on a whole scale level. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, you talked about continuous improvement, and that might come up in the answer to the next question, which is around lean approaches to supply chain management. You talked about push and pull, which would be traditional and lean. And at the same time, this has meant that fewer suppliers, perhaps, in a lean approach, more collaboration around improvement. So, what's your experience of lean, and what would you like to tell people about it?
And I think there are two parts to the questions that, as I hear, so one is just the overall lean approach, and I think all big corporations have integrated this as a part of their culture. So, which is really cool because, lean used to be, if you think historically, a supply chain component. People would talk about it just as a just-in-time or lean manufacturing. But now lean is a cultural thing. It applies to the way organization functions from end to end, which is really cool because when supply chain interacts with, let's say, marketing and sales, and they're on the same wavelength and they're thinking lean as an how can we cut out waste in there. So whether it in forecasting or whether it's in demand planning overall or product flow in there, you are thinking what are the steps that we are doing or what are things that we are doing that we can cut out. And the reason for that is usually we have to be better than what we were before. So I'll give you an example. One of the metrics that is there in all supply chain it's a key performance indicator for all supply chain professionals is a service level. There are different terms for it, but basically how quickly or how efficiently or how on time are you servicing your customer in there. So and there are targets for that. So the lean culture means that every year companies are trying to improve. And it had gotten to a point, for example, at Canadian Tire, we were at 98% service level, which is pretty amazing. That means 98% of the orders were being fulfilled on time. But the lean culture says, can you not do better in there? And that would make us think and almost go back to the drawing board at times. Hey, let's look at our processes. There is somewhat of a waste that is happening. And how can you improve that? So that's a good connection there. But the second aspect I think you touched on, and which is more something actually a project that I'm working on, it's the supplier list and trying to improve, having fewer set of suppliers. So TELUS has embarked on a project for a strategic supplier list, for example, which is picking in. Here are the list of suppliers that we consider strategic or preferred, and we want to do business with them. And the reason for that is you want to get economies of scale. So instead of going to a new vendor and perhaps even getting a better rate, why not go back to one of our existing strategic supplier and ask them, hey, I can get this. I'm already doing $100 million with you. Why can't I now add this another 2 million and get the rate that I've gotten here? So the benefits of that is now you don't have to set up a new vendor, manage them, set them up in with accounting and finance in there, have new set of agreements in there, so negotiating. How about you stick with them? And then from a shared technology perspective, the more vendors you add, the list keeps growing and it's hard to manage in there. So you need to, if you have one contract, so now, in fact, there's policies are being put in companies, including TELUS, is where you have to now go with your strategic base before and you need to have a good reason as in a completely new product, which none of your existing suppliers can give you before you go to a new vendor. And there are many benefits, and companies are now actually being able to say, as a result of using fewer suppliers, they're saving money there.
So that's a good thing, and so your description or your answer there, I think, is very encouraging, because you're saying that most large companies now accept a lean approach. It's become a normal part of how they work, and that's a very positive thing. Okay, so globalization, I thought we would touch on next, which clearly you mentioned at the beginning of the discussion. Now we're seeing tariffs and protectionism. The factors influencing globalization are changing at the moment. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, because that's something that's affecting us on a daily basis. So one, I'll start off by saying it goes back to what we talked about change. Globalization is causing a lot of change, and it's not going to deter the companies, because companies by and large have accepted the fact that the changes are coming from employing foreign resources. They will they just change partners. I think the most current example to explain this, and it affects my current company, is Huawei. So as we know, there's been tariffs being changed, and US has put them on as a no partner list. It has real impact. So companies, though, as a result of this, won't stop doing business. Rather, what they do is look for alternates or work around those regulations. So because cost is a factor, and that's a factor most companies have as their baseline. So when you think of Huawei now, that's a company that's investing over 15 billion in R&D annually. So here's a company that you want to work with, but now with the tariffs that have been put on them in there, would you let go? So I think what companies are doing is what are the actual regulations and what impacts does it have, and you work around that. There, I think the other example on the other side is, for example, if you think, I think a few years back, from a clothing companies, there were factories in Bangladesh that were burned down. Right, so they were, instead of saying, "Hey, we'll stop doing business with them," what companies did, and Coleman had some factories as well, and they said, "We'll put checks in place to ensure there are safe working environments over there, but we'll still continue to source from there." So because again, it's a global world. That solution is not that we'll come back and work only with domestic suppliers. It's working around the constraints that we have, and companies tend to be very innovative. And again, it goes back to our lean approach. How can you do things better instead of just changing them in there?
Okay, so you're saying that it's certainly in the companies you're working with in the areas you have experience of, tariffs and protectionism are things that are a little bit of a hindrance, but aren't going to make a fundamental difference to what companies are doing.
Exactly. So it's not going to change because this is the reality. Companies have accepted. I think maybe sometimes the governments are slow to accept those realities, and that's and the companies are being innovative, which is a really good thing for us as supply chain professionals. Hopefully, lean is built into our DNA in there, so we are able to apply that in the way the companies are dealing with their impacts with globalization and the tariffs and protectionism attitude that you have.
Thank you. Okay, and the triple bottom line, you were especially keen to talk about that.
Yeah.
And I'm keen that you talk about it too. So can you talk about the supply chain and the triple bottom line?
So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because I think it's uber crucial, and sometimes our textbooks don't do justice to that, or at least in the past, and there, because that's a real reality of supply within supply chain, the triple bottom line. Just to put things in context, triple supply chain, triple bottom line entails not just looking at, I talked about EBITDA as your profit line, but so you have a profit line, but you have your people's as a bottom line, and as well sustainability as your bottom line. So you look at your environmental impact, you look at the impact to the people, and you look at your profit impact anytime you're making a decision. So when it comes to supply chain, those three things are actually linked. It's not just a financial number in there, and that's why you would see companies paying attention to those three things. So profit has always been like, you have to report it back to the market, or you're back to your shareholders and stakeholders in there, but it's the people. So companies are investing in their people, and by extension in technology, as we have talked about, because technology helps people. If you give me better tools to do my job, it makes my job easier. I'm more inclined to stay and be more innovative. So people, by investing in technology, companies are investing in me. So when they gave me a new module for SAP, my team was happy that I've given them something that makes their life easier in there. And the third aspect, which is now become uber important, is the sustainability, and supply chain plays a really big role in driving that sustainability. is what's the impact of what we are doing, because supply chain is about moving a product. So when I'm flowing my products, let's say from offshore, I have different tools in my capability that I can use in how the product comes. Now, in order for me to ensure not just how much profit it will be or how optimal it is from a cost perspective, I look at what impact it will have to the environment and how I flow the product. And I think more and more companies are actually encouraging that their supply chain professionals to think in that fashion, where impact to the environment. So instead of bringing some product in, let's say by rail, can you bring in a more environmentally friendly possible way in there? So looking at different options, because optimization, and sometimes it's most of the times it's actually a win-win, because environmental impacts, when for example you bring something with a container that is not full, it's not optimized, you're shipping air, so it's cost company more. At the same time, you're polluting more because the train is coming from wherever the origin is in there. So if you were to optimize now and have a optimally fully loaded container, you save company money because now you're not shipping air, but also that you have cut down on another container that would have come potentially and caused more pollution in there. So it's being built in the DNA. And I guess the overall thing that I think I would encourage people to look up is, you would notice all big companies are now are having a sustainability as a different division almost. So Walmart is huge on it. If you were to go on their website, and they talk a lot about it, how they're investing. TELUS has an entire division of giving back to the community and having sustainable ways of doing things in there. So it's being built into the way we do business. And as we talk about lean, it's built into that. You just not need to look at from a cost perspective. You need to look at those three areas. So the triple bottom line is now interlinked with everything we do.
And very important for the future of the world today. We're becoming more and more aware of why this is. Okay, so you also talked about, or I also know that you're a Six Sigma green belt, and this is something that's important to a lot of companies.
Yeah.
Can you tell the students what Six Sigma is and how the certification for it works?
Sure. So as you said, Peter, that I'm a green belt, and there. So lean is, as I mentioned, is the way of approaching business. Looking at different waste sources. Looking at processes and where are different waste places. So Apex offers a certification, and they offer a green belt as the initial level of certification, and then a black belt. And you do a case study in order to look at a particular company or a particular project and see where the different opportunities of improvement, and you look at the 6 different kinds of waste that are there and see if you can eliminate those. So but I think the key thing is what Six Sigma teaches you is your paradigm inside as to how you look at things. So as to when you look at a product or a process in there, you look at how can you do this better? Where are the different ways? So it's a good certification that's available. Apex offers that. Companies really admire that because, as I said, it's a paradigm shift that it does. It's not just something, it's tool set, but it changes the way you think in there. And companies are looking for that in their day-to-day business.
Yeah, very important. And for the students, the APEX is the American Production and Inventory Control Society, I think.
That's right.
Okay, just so they'll know where to look to find more information.
Absolutely.
Okay, I just got one final question. We've covered a lot of ground, and this has been very valuable. The final question is, for someone who is now looking at their future career, why is supply chain management something that you think they should consider very carefully?
I can go on forever about this, but because such an exciting field in there. One, I'll say it's an evergreen field where people, when they're looking at career options, some job fields get affected by technology, by changes in the way we do. Supply chain has been around for some time, and people have realized its value. It's evolving, and hopefully we have touched on few things as how it's evolving. But supply chain jobs are not going away. If anything, they are being added. Companies are realizing that how important it is. It's being given a seat at the executive table. It's not being, every company is now having a different supply chain department. Sometimes it used to be back in the day lumped with sales and marketing or operations in general in there, but now supply chain is a huge component. It's the winning lever that's out there. So it's a great field. And as I mentioned, it's not just looking at the numbers on the back. You're having a real impact. You control what you go to a grocery store or a supermarket and Walmart and say a supply chain professionals pretty much dictates what gets on the shelf, how much gets on there. I mean, we have talked about the core is still the same. We've started off with the definition, the right product, right time, right quantity is still there. But how you deliver on that is it's changing, and so the technology is obviously shaping that. So as long as you're open to change and you like the change, supply chain is a good field in there, and one should definitely explore that.
Yeah, and I certainly second that. I think it's a very exciting field. The changes which are happening now are ones which give people an opportunity to really influence what's happening inside organizations and to do exciting things, to do things in ways that they've not been done before. So, so yes, I would certainly agree. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me, Ammar. I really appreciate it. The students, I think, are going to find everything you've said valuable. I'm sure we could have talked for much longer about many aspects, but this, I think, is a great resource for the students now, and I'm grateful to you for doing it.
No problem. Thank you for having me, Peter. Really appreciate it.